to do kind of an encore presentation of well-being in higher ed. And Dr. Tracy Brower is a PhD sociologist studying work-life fulfillment and happiness. She's the Vice President of Workplace Insights for Steelcase and the author of The Secrets to Happiness at Work and Bring Work to Life. In addition, she's a senior contributor to Forbes and Fast Company. Her work has been translated into 19 languages, and you can find her at tracybrower.com, LinkedIn, or any of the usual social channels. So with that, we'll welcome you all. And Tracy, welcome. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, you all. Thanks for being here. Super looking forward to our conversation. I love this topic. I love this content. I am going to share my screen and we will kick off together. This is just such a great moment for us in terms of the impact we can make and the direction we can take things. Laura, just prompt me if you see anything in the chat that I need to know about or anything that happens. I can't see you all when I'm sharing my slides, so I know you'll prompt me. So we today want to just talk about a couple of aspects. We're going to focus on well-being and perspectives on well-being. And then we have a really, really cool section of information on embodied cognition and how our spaces contribute to our well-being, but not in the ordinary ways. It's probably some things that you've heard of and some things that might be fresh in terms of your perspectives on them. So looking forward to our conversation. I'll stop a few times and ask you some questions, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. And a few of you submitted questions ahead of time, so we will look at those as well. They are really hard ones. So looking forward to that. All right, you all. So we want to start with today's challenges and what we're facing. One of the things that I always like to start with is just a sense of where we're at. And I follow so much research, and the research on our deteriorating well-being, our incidence of stress, our increasing depression and anxiety is incredible. It will just give you pause. With everything that's happening in the world, everything that's happening in terms of the narratives that we face, it's a very big deal. And one of the things I think is so important as we're talking about education and higher ed in particular is that stat on the bottom left, kind of the middle of your screen. 95% of Gen Zs say that they're stressed out. That's really scary, or that their well-being has deteriorated. And the three questions I ask myself when I see that data: number one, is that really valid? Is it reliable? And the answer is yes, actually. It's a valid, reliable study with a large swath of people. The second thing I say to myself is, wow, what are we doing to support Gen Zs? We better be really, really intentional about that, as well as supporting all generations. And then number three, I say to myself, wow, how do we build resilience? How do we build the capability that we all need to deal with stress, work through stress, and really nurture our well-being and the well-being of people around us? Like, to me, that stat is really a call to action. And we can think about that through the lens of place. We can think about that through the lens of work experience more holistically. So that is the conversation we will have. The other thing following on the heels of that information about stress is the idea of emotional labor. Emotional labor is a critical concept for us. It is the added effort that you do that has to do with feelings, do with your emotions, and it has to do with how you are vigilant about your own emotions and how you come across to people. That's just emotional intelligence, right? It also has to do with your vigilance about others, the ways that you're aware of how they're doing, the ways that you're checking in with them, the ways that you are really being responsive toward other people. So it's you staying healthy and optimistic. It's also, in the face of stress, how you're supporting others. And this is an especially big deal when you consider the stat that I shared on the previous slide. When Gen Zs are struggling so significantly, it is a ton of emotional labor for them, but it's also a ton of emotional labor for faculty and staff and administration, people who are supporting Gen Zs, people who are in the world of Gen Zs, who are also dealing with their own stuff. And I just think it's so incredible, the impact that we all have and how we need to care for ourselves in the process. One of the things we know, sociologically speaking, is that college and university time is such a point of threshold. It's such a point of identity creation and formation. It's such a point of kind of finding yourself and finding your voice and finding your confidence and testing the limits. And so with that critical moment in time, how we surround Gen Zs and how we are able to nurture our best is a very big deal. There was a beautiful example of a cafeteria worker. This one student was really struggling, and she just hadn't connected with roommates, with friends. She hadn't connected with an advisor. She hadn't connected with the professor. But there was this one woman who served her breakfast every day, who would scoop the eggs and ask her, "How are you doing?" and really check in. And she literally tells a story, the student does, and credits this woman on the cafeteria line with saving her life. And so that is the emotional labor part. Like, we're caring for each other, or we care about each other's well-being, and we all make a huge difference to each other in terms of our experience. So here's a question for you. I'm going to ask you to put this right in the chat. I'm going to come back to you in just a second. How much stress do you feel in an average week? So just type one of these three words in the chat: tons, some, or barely any. This is our high level of quantitative data and rigor in terms of our process. So super curious what you all will say. Again, the question was, to what extent do you experience stress in an average week? You can choose tons or some or barely any. So it looks like lots of you are saying some. That's great. A couple of you are saying tons. Nobody's saying barely any. So good to know. This is super relevant, right? Like, how we all are experiencing stress makes a really big difference in how we support each other. And the other thing to know about stress and well-being is that, and you know this, but I think it's helpful for us to validate, it's never a steady state. Like, it's going to be up and down. And if it's up and down, it doesn't mean that we're doing anything wrong. It just means that we're living our lives. But I think that's one of the really interesting things about the narrative around stress in our society, is that we should always be sort of even keel, and we should be top of the world, and things should always be getting better. And then we're judgy about ourselves if it's not. And so I think that's another thing. One of the really interesting sociological studies that I followed said that it asked people to do some very significant lifestyle changes in terms of diet and exercise. And half of the group was told, you can do it, rah, rah, kind of a cheerleader effect. The other half of the group was validated. It's hard, it's difficult, it's going to be a tough road, but you can do it. The group that got the validating feedback instead of the just rah-rah feedback made significantly more lifestyle changes that stuck over the longer term. There is something really important about our ability to just validate where we are and be okay with the fact that sometimes our lives and stress levels can ebb and flow. So thank you all for answering that whole question in our super formal way that we are checking in with you on data. All right, you all, let's keep talking about stress and challenge. So we also wanted to just check in a minute on the value of community and challenge. And this is where I think we can reinvent our narrative. I think we can normalize stress to a greater extent. Of course, if we're stressed, we need to nurture ourselves. Of course, if we're stressed, we need to nurture others. And I think we can also reset our expectations for stress. And there's actually a really interesting concept called eustress. Eustress is kind of the Goldilocks amount of stress. Like, in reality, that's a parabola curve on the bottom right there. If you, on the lower left, have no stress, no reason to get off of the couch, nothing challenging you, you may become depressed, demotivated, and disheartened. On the other side of the parabola curve on the right, if you have way too much stress and you're barely holding on by your fingernails and you're not even sure how to face the next minute, you also may become depressed, demotivated, or disheartened. But there is an ideal amount of pressure, stress, challenge that is called eustress. That's just enough. you have an interesting challenge that you're facing, you have a tough problem you're solving, you have things that you have to do that kind of get you off of the couch or get you out of bed in the morning. And I think we can remind ourselves that those are healthy things, because there are lots of hard things in life, and the things that are hardest are actually a lot of times the most meaningful, right? Like partnerships are really hard, and parenting can be really hard, and work can be really hard, and accomplishing a great significant event through your schooling can be really hard, but those things are also rewarding. In fact, there's beautiful research that the harder you work to accomplish something, the more you will be satisfied and celebratory when you accomplish it at all. So the other thing to know is that stretch and challenge are correlated with happiness. We all need those, Saturday afternoons where we're reading a great book and, I don't know, eating a bowl of popcorn. Or we need those things about our work that we don't have to work quite so hard at. But when we have the right amount of stuff that is challenging us, that's a good thing. And a growth mindset comes in here too. We can always get better. We can continuously improve. We may not have been perfect before, but that doesn't make us flawed. We're all flawed, of course, but it gives us that opportunity to improve, and we know we can grow and get better all the time. The harder you work for something, the more you'll appreciate accomplishing it, as I said. So I'd love to hear, I'm going to ask you in a minute about challenges that you appreciate. But I think what we can do as we think about well-being, first of all, we can validate where we're at. We can be sort of vigilant about nurturing ourselves and others. And we can also seek challenge, because if we stretch any place, we actually grow every place. And you can do this inside of work, inside of learning experiences, inside of learning environments, or outside. So if you stretch to learn a new language, if you stretch to do something that's unfamiliar, like, I don't know, rock climbing, or taking a hike that's maybe a little bit more challenging, or pushing yourself to, go for a run that's just a little longer than usual. Sometimes stretching looks like expressing an unpopular opinion in a constructive way and kind of pushing or advocating. Sometimes stretching looks like exposing yourself to new kinds of music or new kinds of art that might push you out of your comfort zones. Essentially, this is how might you get out of your comfort zones in order to kind of build your ability to stretch, build your ability toward well-being that is significantly derived from challenge and opportunities to push a little outside of your comfort zone. Growth doesn't happen without discomfort. So if we want to grow, which of course we want to develop over time, we want to seek those discomforts in the most appropriate ways. So here's a question for you all. If you want to put this in the chat again, that would be super great. What kind of challenge motivates you most? And you can just put this one word in the chat. Physical, cognitive, or something else. So go ahead, if you don't mind, and say which kind of challenge motivates you most. Super interesting to see what you all say here. I'm going to take this down and check in and see what you all are saying. So some of you are saying physical, some are saying physical and cognitive. Very cool, you all. When we get to the Q&A, I would love to hear what you all say in terms of what the choices are that you make. I had a really, really interesting example from somebody recently. She said she's super, super introverted. And on days when she's working from home, she takes her dog for a walk, but that gets her out of her comfort zone because she has a super, super social neighborhood, and then she runs into tons of people, which actually pushes her out of her comfort zone in terms of like her preference for being by herself and her preference for, maybe not socializing quite so much. So I just thought that was a really creative way to have, to express that and to think about how you push yourselves out of your comfort zone. Lots of you are saying, oh, cognitive and creative. I love that. And many of you are saying both physical and cognitive. Oh, this is cool. Physical gets me motivated, but the physical activity helps me cognitively. Yes, there is so much research on well-being as it relates to exercise. I actually did an article on this in Forbes. Like, we all know exercise is good for us, but exercise contributes so much toward not just your endorphins, but to your blood flow. And that is a really big reason that it is associated with well-being. And the other thing that's very significantly associated with well-being is access to nature. And that has to do with the color blue and the color green, which we will talk about in a little bit. The other thing we know about access to nature, so if you're, going for a run outside, if you're going for a run at Planet Fitness or some, club, keep doing that. That's really good. But if you're outside, one of the interesting things that happens is nature is really, really complex. Like there's breezes, or there's changes in temperature, or lighting shifts, or we see shifts in waves if we're near water at all. And that tends to stimulate our need for variety. In fact, there's some really interesting research that if you spend more time in nature, you might eat more healthfully. I'm still working on this. I have not found this to be true myself quite yet, but I'm optimistic. And part of the reason is that you're getting stimulation from nature, so maybe you don't need as much stimulation from food. So there you go. There's your possibilities for new ways of thinking about nature. All right. So thank you for answering that question. Super interesting. Stretching anywhere helps you stretch everywhere. All right. So let's talk a minute about self-care and well-being. First of all, I think it's really important that we talk about self-care for leaders. So the right answers really vary. Like there's a lot of narrative on self-care. As we think about well-being, nurturing ourselves, as we think about our ability to nurture others, we need to be able to nurture ourselves in order to kind of come wholly to something and have a strong foundation that we're starting with. And the narrative on self-care tends to be about slowing down, say no, do less, slow down. However, and that's great. If that's you, that's wonderful. Do that as much as you can. Sometimes that doesn't feel possible. And so slowing down can actually feel like pressure. Like, yeah, I'll slow down after I finish all these 1,000 things, right? With childcare and elder care and the stuff I, need to support my partner on, and all the things at work, and all the things with students, and all the things with my job responsibilities. So sometimes slowing down can feel like more pressure. The other thing is that depending on your penchant for activity, you may actually be more energized by doing more. There's some really brilliant research that suggests when you're doing activities that energize you, you actually perceive that you have more time on your hands. And so saying yes to something that you're excited about, saying yes to something that energizes you, even if your plate's really full, may actually give you the perception of more time. Another narrative in the self-care dialogue that's out there right now is be alone. Like, take a bath alone, have your glass of wine alone, have your glass of iced tea alone, whatever you prefer, and just, say no to other people. And that too is really personal. You may actually be energized by getting advice and spending time with friends, or having a close, cup of coffee with somebody where you can really let down your hair and get advice. So the takeaway message on self-care is do what works for you rather than doing what the narrative tells you to do. Another just fun thing here is that sometimes doing less is a really good idea, because when you invest in experiences instead of investing in things, you actually tend to experience more happiness. Like it's correlated more greatly with joy to do a thing or have an experience with friends or on your own than it is to buy something new. And here are some bonus approaches for well-being as well. These are things that, believe it or not, there is research that suggests that these will help your well-being. So I don't know about you, but I'm a really big napper on the weekends, like Saturdays, Sundays. I've got to have my nap. So if you are a napper, keep doing that. That's really good for your well-being. Pets are actually significantly correlated with both physical and emotional well-being. Giving to others and gratitude are both associated with well-being. And maybe you've heard about cold therapy. There's some new research at Harvard about cold therapy, where if you, get out in the cold on a cold winter day, or you have a cold shower or a polar plunge, those are actually really, really good because they activate your vagus nerve, and that can reduce your stress. So there you go. There's your well-being fun facts for today. But let's also talk about well-being as it relates to the power of place. So how do we create the conditions for well-being beyond those individual level characteristics? How do we think about places that really generate well-being and nurture well-being? I love this. Places can help us look at things differently. Well, duh, but really, right, when we're intentional about how we create those experiences, it can make a really big difference for us and for others. So there is this wonderful concept called embodied cognition, and this is the idea that our feelings and actions are significantly determined by our surroundings. And this is a confluence of things. There are so many different variables here, but believe it or not, there is academic research on all the things I will talk about. One is ceiling height. So when you are in a room with a really high ceiling, you are more likely to do divergent and creative tasks more effectively. And when you're in an environment with a lower ceiling, you may be more likely to do analytical tasks or detail-oriented tasks more effectively. So like super interesting stuff. The other thing is that if you're holding a warm cup of something, like you've got warm tea, warm coffee, warm hot chocolate, whatever, you will tend to behave in a more pro-social manner as compared with if you're holding a cold cup of something. Now, of course, you can still be pro-social if you're, holding your iced tea, but that warmth that you're holding on to can translate into warmth in terms of how you interact with people. In fact, I did a little stint at an organization that sold coffee, and actually it was M&M Mars. And so we were looking at the business that sold coffee and refreshments in the environment, right? We weren't looking at M&Ms, but that would have been fun too. And what we did is we had this experiment where we asked people to do a team activity with coffee and then a team activity without coffee. And the output from the team activity where people had coffee in their hands was significantly better. Like, I know we weren't perfectly objective in the outcome we were looking for, but we were objective in terms of the way we designed the experiment. So it was kind of fun and interesting, and probably chocolate's a good idea too. All right, here's something else about embodied cognition. The color green can absolutely help us focus. So the photo on the right is our Boston work life, so our red thread space in Boston. So come visit us there if you haven't already been. The color green tends to focus us. And that comes from an instinctual preference for green. When we were kind of evolving and we were on the savannah, we were hunting and gathering, we tended to focus on green because that would be in the distance, like a tree or a foliage, and that suggested to us that that had to have water in the vicinity. So green tends to focus us at a really deep level, partly because there's that water in the vicinity. Or that's what we expect. And so there's the residual effects of green. And the color red is super interesting. That red area is from our space in Hartford, Connecticut. No, wait, Laura, is that Hartford or Boston?
The red is Hartford, you're right.
Thank you. Good. I said it. I heard it come out of my mouth and it didn't sound right. So that is my my amateur photo of the amazing, gorgeous space in Hartford, Connecticut that Red Thread has there. And the color red tends to energize you. Like, we always know red is associated with passion or anger or high emotion, but it can also tend to energize you. So if you're going to have, maybe a really difficult conversation, you might not go to the area where you're sitting in the red furniture. But if you want that energy and you want to feel that level of energy, red could be a really good choice. So the really powerful thing about embodied cognition is we're not thinking about this stuff consciously, but it's interesting in terms of how it affects us in terms of our surroundings. Here's another thing that's pretty cool about embodied cognition. And again, there's academic research on this one as well. Soft seating or hard seating can make a difference in how significantly and seriously we view an issue. So when we sit in harder seating, we may tend to think like it may send us a signal that it's a serious topic or a serious thing that we're going to be sitting and discussing. In softer seating, even if the posture is similar, even if it's an upright posture, we may feel slightly more relaxed. Of course, a lot of times softer seating has a more relaxed posture, but we can absolutely be in softer seating that's more upright. And so the kind of seating. Now, the other thing about this is it's not just how you're sitting and whether you're sitting, but the cues that these kinds of differences send to us as well in terms of what we see in the physical environment. So I think that's pretty cool too. It's how are we managing our well-being and managing our experience based on when people engage in the space, but also when they just view the space and have a visual experience of the space. That's super interesting. So here's my question for you all, again in the chat. What is your favorite place to be? So you can choose woods or water or home, or if you prefer a wild card, you can choose something else and you can, do a free entry here. So, I'm looking on my phone at your chat from previously. You said naps rule, naps. Oh, naps equal life. You are my people. Thank you. I love that. So yeah, I'm looking at the chat now. It looks like lots of you are water people. Some of you are woods people. Oh, Ken, the golf course. Good one. I love the golf course. I actually, full disclosure, I don't actually golf. I'm a caddy for my husband and our son, but it is like my favorite place to be. And it's just great time together. Not water on a golf course. Casey, that is brilliantly said. I very much appreciate that. Beach, woods, water, yeah. And in our vicinity, I live in Michigan, you all live on the eastern seaboard, you get woods and water, right? So it's kind of a special thing when you don't necessarily have to choose between them. So thank you, you all. Fun to think about what energizes you and fun to think about how you bring that in. There's some really interesting work on the concept of transcendence and awe. When we feel a sense of awe, we tend to feel less stressed and we tend to feel a greater level of significance and therefore a greater level of sort of calm and perspective. And so you think about like watching a sunset at the beach or being in nature, you like look out, like you're hiking through the woods and you hit a lookout point. A lot of times that natural experience gives you a sense of awe. You just pause and you're like, oh, the colors of the trees or oh, the sunset or the sound of the waves, right? What's happening in your brain is you are having actually less blood flow to the part of your brain that's vigilant, that's thinking about how you come across and how others come across and how you're managing yourself and all the things that you need to do. And you have greater blood flow to the part of your brain that is more relaxed and gets into more of a flow state, more of the emotional part of your brain. And so that is why those experiences of awe are really powerful. We actually have, and height can give you those experiences of awe. We actually have a dealer on the West Coast, and they have this very cool conference room that's up in the space. You walk up to the conference room, but you can kind of see over. We've got one of those here in headquarters at Steelcase as well. And those are good experiences where you can kind of look over things. In fact, here's another M&M Mars story. I didn't plan to tell all these M&M Mars stories, but in the M&M plant in Hackettstown, there's a very cool conference room, and it looks like a Snickers bar, and it like sits above everything else, and it's like literally like decorated like the outside of a Snickers bar, and then it looks over the plant. So pretty cool, you all. We can do it in lots of different ways, whether in nature or in our physical space. All right, here's another example in terms of embodied cognition, and that is delight and surprise. So when we get surprised, that's a really good thing because it tends to be more sticky. One of the things we know is attention is one of the most scarce resources today. We just have so much coming at us. It's just impossible to like focus sometimes, or we're focusing just on the thing we need to focus on, and it's hard to bring in lots of other things. So when we have spaces that offer surprise and delight options, That is a really cool thing. So this horse lamp is in Hartford, which I think is the coolest thing ever, right? Like you get off the elevator and it's just weird and wacky and gets your attention and makes you stop and think, that is a horse lamp. And it's a full, like it's a life-size horse. So it's a perfect example of a surprise and delight option. Or I like this example of the bird light as well. This is in our New York City work life. But the takeaway message here is you can have landmarks in the space that kind of give people pause or give them a place to go. Hey, let's meet at the such and such. Or you may have things that surprise and delight in the space. I grew up in the automotive industry, and when I was starting out in the automotive industry, minivans were really big. I know minivans aren't so cool anymore, but minivans were really big at the time. And the really big thing that all the marketing executives were talking about with minivans was surprise and delight options. The surprise and delight options in an automobile still are the things that aren't marketed, but you get the car and you're like, this is so cool. I'm surprised and delighted. And in minivans, it was cup holders at the time. Like you can never have too many cup holders when you are a minivan owner. But the takeaway message here is that when we find ways to surprise people, when we find experiences in the space that are a little sticky, that kind of give us a mental speed bump, those can be a very good idea in terms of how we get people's attention and how we remember. One of the other things that is really relevant about us being together in space is when you move, you tend to cement your memory better. So there's some brilliant research where people were asked to study a topic and then move to another room and have a test on the topic, or stay in the same room and be tested on the topic. And when there was movement in between, the concepts tended to cement better in memory. The other interesting thing about place and memory is that when you're in a space, you tend to make a physical representation of the space in your brain. So it's easier to remember. This is part of the reason that so many video calls can be exhausting for us, because they're all the same, right? Like it's always kind of the same screen that we're looking at. But if we're together in person, we remember, we did the brainstorming, and remember we had that pink Post-it note on the right, or, remember we were in the such and such room, or, remember that funny thing happened and, we couldn't get the technology to work that day, whatever. You remember based on the physical experience of the meeting as well as the interaction. So that makes things sticky as well. And that makes the point that more variety in our spaces can actually add to the experience that we are creating together. All right. Another thing that you all are surely aware of, but is super important as we think about embodied cognition, is the idea of biophilia. So we tend to crave nature. Edward O. Wilson did tons of work on this, as well as a researcher named Appleton. We crave nature. We anticipate natural environments. Unfortunately, there are lots of parts of our lives where we never touch foot in nature, right? We're on the carpeting or the wood floor in our home, and we go to the garage and we get in our car, and then we're in a parking garage, and then we go to our office, right? We've never set foot other than on an asphalt surface or a man-made surface, person-made surface. And there is a lot of value in our access to nature. And prospect and refuge is important here too. So if we look at what we crave in terms of our experience of space, we prefer spaces where we have refuge, like we've got protection behind us. Nobody's going to sneak up behind us. Nobody's going to read our screen from behind us. And we can see out. We can kind of see what's coming. This too comes from kind of our instinct for safety. We know that no predators are going to sneak up behind us. We can see ahead to what we need to be aware of, and maybe the prey that we need to think about for feeding our young, right? If we really think about deep instinctual patterns. Prospect and refuge is something that we prefer significantly in our physical environments as grown-ups in the current world. This is why booths fill first in restaurants. restaurants. This is why you probably don't want to be the person at the, open table in the middle of the restaurant. You want one of those edge spaces. And so here are some examples of that I think are pretty cool. Bottom left is our space in Boston at the Red Thread space. I think this is a really cool example because it looks out on the city and you can see out, right? You can get a really good view, but you also feel protection. So if you're sitting in that gray couch, right, even though it's open behind you, you still feel protected because of the wall of windows. We also have this incredible product of tents that's very cool. So middle photo, that is in Hartford again, and it offers the sense of space, right? So, I'm so not the product person, so this isn't a product presentation, but you get the idea that you can kind of feel a sense of shelter. The really fascinating thing about tents is that they don't offer either visual or acoustical privacy, but you still get that sense of space, of prospect and refuge. And I really love the one on the right as well. That's pretty cool because while it is open, the material of that kind of black that is toward us, the gentleman with the hat has his back to that kind of black material. That is a very big deal because it still gives you that sense of refuge, even though there is no visual privacy in the space. So the takeaway message here is when we're managing our well-being, it's a very big deal when we provide people with spaces that offer prospect and refuge and spaces that give them enough variety that they can make those choices on their own depending on what they're most comfortable with. Another thing to be aware of as we think about well-being and spaces that support well-being is proximity to others. So this is a very big deal. When we feel disconnected from others, it's one of the worst things in terms of our well-being. In fact, there is brilliant research from Brigham Young University. Actually, I'm meeting with them later today from Brigham Young University. And a researcher there has determined that having one or two close friends is more important to your health outcomes, cancer, depression, mental health, heart disease, and overall longevity. Having one or two close friends is more important to those health outcomes than your habits around drinking or exercise or diet, and on par with your habits around smoking. So the takeaway message there is that we absolutely need connections with each other. And this is true even if you're an introvert, even if you don't need a plethora of friends, you need at least a couple of close connections. So we're wired for connection. We have an instinct to matter. Like we want to know that somebody's noticing that we show up. We want to know that somebody cares that we are, delivering on our deliverable. We want to know that what we're doing matters to other people. And so being together, being in spaces that give us the opportunities to be together, either in groups or in pairs or even like in an area where we can catch emotional contagion, those are important. What we tend to do, sociologically speaking, is pick up the energy of other people when we're together. So even if we're in the work cafe and we don't know other people, just the idea of being in the same space and kind of reminding ourselves that we all showed up together can be a very positive human experience and a very significant and energizing experience. The other thing is that there's some brilliant research on the spillover that relates to engagement and productivity. So when we are working side by side with somebody who's super engaged, or when we are working side by side with somebody who's especially productive, that tends to spill over to us individually and as teams. So again, academic research on the topic. We can be productive, we can be engaged by ourselves, of course, but there is some spillover effect when we're with others who are demonstrating those kinds of behaviors. So kind of cool, you all. The future isn't something we enter, it is something we create. So what are our tangible takeaways from our discussion? So we've had a chance to talk about some of the challenges we face with well-being. We've talked about our roles as it relates to well-being. We've talked about self-care and how we nurture ourselves, as well as how places can nurture our well-being. So care for yourself, kind of pay attention to what self-care works best for you. Nurture, care, and challenge for yourself. So the other thing is seek challenge. Like, I love the idea, any good sociologist can put concepts on a 2x2. And if you think about kind of psychological safety on a vertical axis of a 2x2, right? High, medium, and low, how much psychological safety do you have? And then on the horizontal axis, how much comfort or discomfort do you experience? A lot of really great outcomes can come from a high. You feel super safe psychologically to bring your whole self. You feel like your team has your back. You feel like you can kind of show up and do your best, whatever your best is uniquely. And you are able to take risks. You're able to take appropriate risks. You're going to step out on the limb. You're going to put forward the new idea. You're going to come up with something that is a little bit outside of your comfort zone. So ironically, when we have high levels of psychological safety, we can also be more comfortable with discomfort. And heaven knows we can absolutely appreciate that with all of the challenges that are facing us today. You have huge influence on creating experiences just by how you show up. And I think we can recognize kind of our own power in terms of the way that we provide emotional support and nurture well-being in others, either as we're creating work experiences or as we're nurturing well-being in terms of the way that we empathize and demonstrate compassion and pay attention to others and be present and accessible. So this is our moment for a bright future, you all. We have great things ahead of us. So I am going to just take a couple of minutes and answer some questions that came in ahead of time. But if you are also willing to put additional questions or comments in the chat, that's great. I will come back to you in just a second, and you can come off mute as well. But let me just cover a couple of questions that came up super quickly. So really good one. And team, Steelcase and Red Thread team, jump in if you care to, of course. What is the landscape of the college campus in the future as tuition is increasing? This is a great question. One of the things that I think is operating right now is we're seeing this really interesting trend towards skills-based hiring and toward companies that are hiring for a career. So there are some really interesting interviews that we've done lately and that you can see in the trends where HR leaders, CHROs are saying, I don't care where you got your education. I don't care if you went to school or not. I want you to just come with your skills. If you learned on your own in your garage, if you took a correspondence course, that's all good. Come on in with the skills you have. I value skills, and I will teach you skills going forward. So that's one trend that's going on. But I think the other trend is we absolutely know that education continues to be valued in our society. And I absolutely believe that when we are together, that creates a center of gravity. When we are apart and doing our work or doing our learning or developing ourselves, sometimes that can feel more transactional. So the power of the campus will continue to be powerful when we are all together. And so one of the things that's true is colleges and universities are serving people by definition at a transitional stage, whether they're traditional students or non-traditional students. They're at this like moment in their life where they're learning something new, they're getting a certification, they're getting a degree, they're getting an advanced degree. And those are big life decisions and big life moments. And campuses provide a really important touch point and a really important place of significance as we're going through that together, because we generally want to go through that with other people. And when we do it in community, it's more significant. So you all can weigh in on that. Let me do two more questions, then I'm going to come back to you so we have plenty of time for additional questions. Many schools are moving admin units off campus. What effect does this have on a sense of belonging for the staff and the connection to the university? You all may not like my answer on this. I think it's a big deal. Like, I actually think when we can all stay on campus, it's helpful to our understanding of our identity and our understanding in terms of line of sight. One of the things we know is that when people have a greater line of sight toward others that they're serving, they tend to have a greater level of purpose. So what I do contributes to what he does and she does and they do, and finally our, final person that's getting value from our process. That tends to be more motivational when we have that longer sense of purpose. And belonging doesn't just come from being together. It comes from a shared sense of social identity. And place is an important part of that shared sense of social identity. The thing that comes to mind again and again for me every time I look at this question, we were working years ago actually with a healthcare organization, and they were moving all of their admin to an industrial park out of the hospital because they were out of space. And so their CHRO, head of HR, said, I just don't like this because I can't hear the ambulances anymore. And that was his sense of significance, right? So if we move away from what it is that's most significant about our roles, about our jobs, about our contributions, sometimes that can get in the way of belonging. I understand that maybe what we need to do from a strategic level, and you all will make the best decisions for yourself, and you can totally discount what I say, but I do think it makes a difference. All right. As institutions of higher education are under continuous pressure to deliver ROI, how does well-being factor into that accountability? Or in other words, how does cultivating well-being in higher education translate to cultivating well-being in the workplace? I think this is so interesting, right? The hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. So what people get used to in families and then elementary and middle and high schools translates to what they expect in colleges and universities. And in colleges and universities, that absolutely translates toward the workplace. So when we attend effectively to well-being in colleges and universities, we're turning out people who not only have better skills and competencies, but also probably wherewithal, resilience, emotional clarity in order to be the best possible performers in the workplace. So there is that flow in terms of how we think about our ongoing development through multiple stages, and we absolutely can be accountable from one stage to the next in terms of how we're showing up and how we're creating the conditions. But whoever asked those questions, I'd love you to weigh in on your opinions of those as well. So let me come back to you. We've got about 10 minutes for questions for you all, and stay in touch with us as well. We would love to hear what you all are thinking about all these. So let me come back to you. This is great. Anita says, thought on creating friends at work or on campus. Create clubs, for example, a knitting or a hiking or a museum visiting or volunteering clubs. When you join a club, you meet like-minded people and you will find instant friends. It makes work or school more enjoyable to have a buddy or two. Yeah, for sure. And those groups of people are a big deal. We tend to understand our choices and we tend to shape our choices based on our referent group. So if any of you drive Subarus, that's a really great example. Like there's a really strong culture of Subaru drivers, people who value nature and value the outdoors and value adventure. Or if you're a Harley driver, right, there's a very strong culture of people who drive Harleys. Think about people who are Swifties. Think about people who, reject at all costs wearing mom jeans. When we have a referent group, that tends to guide the choices that we make. So when we create those referent groups, that makes a really big difference as well. And it has everything to do with well-being. So those affinity groups are a really great idea for us to not only build our identity, but get reinforced in terms of that identity and that sense of community and connection, which are so critical to well-being. So I love the point. Ken, is not everybody a Swiftie? Oh gosh, right? Oh, it's terrifying what's happening out there. So thanks for that point, Anita. Thanks for your point, Ken. So if any of you are Swifties, you don't have to necessarily admit it. Other questions, you all, or comments from anybody who had the other questions, or anybody who has other things to say. We'd love to hear anything.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the question about admin not coming in, and could you address like how that impacts the culture of the office?
Yeah,
or
right.
essentially it is an office in higher ed.
Yeah, it's a great point, Laura. And you can jump in on this as well because you're a super expert on the topic. The thing that we absolutely know is hybrid is here to stay. Hybrid learning, hybrid work. We absolutely are not going back to the time of, dinosaurs and 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. But there is also power in being together. So I think we want to be really clear about when we're going to be together. And we also have to be really careful about equity. Like, hybrid work sets up the conditions for us to say, well, how come you get to come in? How come you get to stay home? How come you? How come you? How come they? And so I think if we have situations where we have different groups who have different levels of choice, we may need to be especially clear about the principles that have driven that, about the job content or work content that has driven that, and we need to be super intentional about when and how we all come together. And I think the other best practice is for us to really think about why. Like, lots of organizations are, when and where and how. When and where and how are you showing up for class? When, where, and how are you showing up to do your admin work, your faculty work, your staff work? And better than that is for us to clarify why we want people there, because we want a culture of connection. We want a culture of, student involvement. We want a culture of enrichment, whatever, but also the why for people, so that you can have better career development, so that you have better connections, so that you feel like your work is more rewarding. So for me, it's almost like a hierarchy. When, where, what, okay. Why for the organization, better. Why for both organization and people, best. And then, making sure that we've got equity. If admin isn't coming in, but faculty has to be there, we should make sure we're really clear about what those expectations are and the why behind those as well. But Laura, would you add anything to that or say that differently?
No, I thought that was perfect. Well said. It's just,
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, super great question. Other questions from anyone? Or thoughts or differences of opinion on any of this? Liz, you're not a Swiftie. We respect that. Same here. We had a conference recently, and we had a few people there who had brought bracelets, and then there was all the bracelet stuff going on, which I understand is like a Swiftie thing, so go figure. It is interesting, though, our identities, right? And one of the things that happens is companies and businesses are saying, how do we create belonging and how do we create identity? And this is something that educational organizations get so right, that I think is so fascinating, right? You wear the colors for the rest of your life. You identify with the mascot, right? Our son goes to University of Michigan. My goodness, he's a Wolverine, how much in my wardrobe do I have that's maize and blue? I know. Our daughter went to Boston University, so I do have a fair amount of terrier stuff as well. But, right, universities and colleges do this brilliantly, this idea of identity and this idea of the values that come from that. When our identity is tied to a certain set of values, that drives our commitment, it drives our ownership, it drives our morale, it drives our community. Those are powerful things. And so when we demonstrate those in place, that's a big deal as well. So very fun. Ken says, when I taught in business school, we used to say that the future isn't a place we're going, it's something that's coming at you. Interesting. Flexibility is the key. Can we create spaces that are flexible enough to accommodate an unknown future? Ken, do you want to come off mute? That is just brilliantly said. I love that.
Yeah, well, it's just, it's really kind of, I think, being taught everywhere now in business schools that, it's not just a case of resilience. It's a case of actually embedding flexibility into your organizational structure, into your physical plant, et cetera. And I find it really difficult to figure out how we create in physical plant something that is going to be that flexible so that we don't invest in something that's obsolete because we didn't foresee a new technology or another pandemic or something else that was coming down the road. So that's all I'm asking. You folks see a lot more spaces than I do.
Yeah, brilliantly said. I mean, that is a huge trend we're seeing right now toward active learning, towards spaces where you can move the tech around, towards spaces where you can move the space around, and the tools and the learning the equipment that supports learning, the furniture that supports learning. And we actually did a very cool study and found that when students had active learning environments, they reported 91% of them said this helped me with my learning, compared to 33% who said that a static classroom helped them. And the other thing that they reported was better learning. Like they literally said, I'm learning better in this active learning environment, number one. Number two, they reported better skill development with innovation and collaboration. To the extent that we're going to have to collaborate, to the extent that we're going to have to figure out new solutions all the time, they learned those skills better in an active learning environment. And they also reported they felt higher levels of motivation. And I think that has to do with like the environment's more stimulating, you're interacting with people around you more. And so those were really, really interesting sort of quantifiable results that were about spaces that could shift and technology that could shift. I actually was just with a giant life insurance company this morning, and their IT director was saying, yeah, we want consistency when we're in this hybrid environment so people don't show up all the time and not know how to work the tech, but the tech is constantly changing. So we agreed that, you know, one of the things that was going to be consistent was the tech itself might not be consistent, but the experience of, hey, we have a laminated card that tells you how. Hey, we've got somebody you can call. Hey, we're going to communicate ahead of time that it's going to be shifting. Those balances of active learning with consistency in terms of the technology are also part of, I think, the best practice. So it's a great point. Yes, I can share that data. Why don't I'll send you some follow-up stuff. I'll send that to the Steelcase and Red Thread team, and they can send it to you. I can put it in the chat as well after we're finished.
Also, Tracy, a lot of people are asking for the slides, and I confirmed that you'll share those as well.
Yep, we'll share those as well. We'll send you a little packet of slides and follow-up articles and research. Yep, you bet, you all.
Tracy,
awesome.
one other example on the flexibility, and this is a while ago. There was somebody at a life science company, and the CEO's statement was really, you know, when we're going through all of our research, like we don't always get everything right. Why do we think we're going to get the space right to support the future? And so they actually did a lot of programming looking at just creating flexibility in the space going forward, to where they took it to probably the most extreme that I've ever seen, where they actually put potential soffits in their ceiling and handled the HVAC. So they might, where it's an open area today, they might in the future be able to create a 20 by 20 space, or it might be 4 10 by 10 spaces. And they actually changed their space on an ongoing basis as different teams came together for different drugs. Mm-hmm. So that's taken it to the extreme, but there are ways to be able to think about, you know, how do you create that flexibility going forward?
Brilliantly said. Well, awesome, you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks for the dialogue. Thanks for the questions ahead of time and the dialogue now. We super appreciate it. So let me turn it back to Laura and Casey, and maybe you can close us out.
Thank you,
Great.
Tracy.
Yeah, thank you. We really appreciate that. Was such an inspiring conversation, and I heard things I didn't hear ever before. So
awesome.
It was really well done. Thank you.
Awesome.
We appreciate it as
Thanks,
always.
you all. Stay in touch with us and let us know what you're learning along the way.
Yep.
Take care.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Tracy.
Bye.